Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbong. Today, we're going to talk about sex. Not explicitly or anything, but actually, now that I think about it, the books we're going to talk about today are less about the act of sex and more about how our sex lives map onto our everyday lives, our jobs, our bills, our friends, and neighbors. Up ahead, a sex survey gets sent around a small Midwestern town. But first, Erin Summers' novel, The 10-Year Affair, is a bit of a throwback to a certain style of literary domestic dramas that don't seem to be super in vogue these days. Think work by John Cheever or Richard Yates. But Summers says what makes middle-class malaise different for this generation is that, well, that house with the white picket fence isn't as attainable anymore. And that does affect your sex life. My conversation with Erin Summers after the break.
This message comes from NPR sponsor CNN. Stream Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, Prime Cuts now, exclusively on the CNN app. These rarely seen, never-before-streamed episodes dig deep into the Parts Unknown archives with personal insights from Anthony Bourdain and rare behind-the-scenes interviews about each season. Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, Prime Cuts, now streaming exclusively on the CNN app. Subscribe now at cnn.com/all-access. Available in the U.S. only.
To all the married folks listening, let me ask you a question. You ever have a crush on someone, not your partner? Maybe someone at work or in your friend group? Nothing too serious. But then, do you ever think about what would happen if? Or how would it go if you grazed their hand or kissed or found yourselves in a hotel room together? In the new novel, The 10-Year Affair, our protagonist, Cora, thinks about it a lot. So much so that it blurs the line between what's real and what's just fantasy. Or maybe fantasies are real? Either way, author Erin Summers joins us now from our New York bureau. Hey, Erin.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. This book has rocked me a little bit. So Cora lives in a small suburb in the Hudson Valley when we meet her, right? She's married, she's got 2 kids, she's got a toddler and an infant, and she meets Sam at a baby care class. What is about Sam, that attracts her?
Well, I think that there is a feeling of him just being anyone but her husband at first.
Mm-hmm.
Just a feeling of the other and a feeling of someone unfamiliar. But he also is charming and handsome, and they have a sort of chemistry that they can't explain.
Did Cora think she'd end up in the burbs with a house and a husband and kids?
I don't think anybody living in Brooklyn thinks that that's going to happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly didn't.
Yeah.
Part of it is that she is a little bit deflated that this is where she ended up. And, it's not sexy. It's not a fantasy. It's taking your kids to school every day and then doing your remote job. So, yeah, I think she had more glamorous ideas for herself.
So the book sort of splits off into 2 parallel tracks, right? Like I mentioned before, there's like the fantasy version where Cora has an affair with Sam, and then you get reality. Why was this your approach to writing about infidelity?
Well, the conceit came to me intuitively, actually. I sat down to write, and I did not know that it was going to go in that direction until I typed the word multiverse into the draft. And then I thought I should follow that. That would be a really cool idea. You don't see a multiverse plot mixed with domestic fiction much. So I thought it could bring a real freshness to the subject matter. Then there was the question of execution, whether I could pull it off. But I thought it would be really fun to try, so I followed it.
There's some details in this book that are unique to a certain class of people, at least Cora and Elliot. They're not rich, right? They're not loaded, but they're doing, I think, like just well enough to feel guilty about it, right? There's moments where after they buy a house, and people come over, they have to point out, be like, oh, but, this thing, there's this problem with it, there's that problem with it, sort of apologizing for having, the scratch to, buy a house. What do you think is driving that sort of guilt?
Well, it's a send-up of this very narrow segment of the population near where I live, this very small milieu of downwardly mobile, overeducated millennials who are clinging to the bottom rung of the middle class and feel a little guilty about it because they're supposed to not even have been able to enter the middle class. People who do sometimes feel a compulsion to apologize for it or to disavow the house, to say, it's a pretty crummy house and here's what's wrong with it, which I find kind of funny. And I wanted to poke fun at a little bit.
I've since caught myself doing it since I read your book. And then I had people over to the crib and I was like, oh, leaking roof. And it's like, I think I'm doing that thing. And I don't know where it's coming from.
I mean, it doesn't come from a bad place. It comes from a place of precarity. Like we've been so precarious, people my age, for so many years that it's like it all feels very temporary, like it could go away. And it feels like you're not showing class solidarity if you get some tiny scrap of something, some modest home or something like that.
When we're talking about this very specific milieu that you had mentioned, we're talking about white people, right? We're talking about, or mostly, right? Is that what you're thinking of? Like when I'm thinking of the Hudson Valley suburbs, it is a mostly white place, right?
Mostly white, and that is part of their blinkered worldview and part of the comedy around their blinkered worldview.
Yeah. When I pitched this book to my editor, I sort of made like a funny joke that us millennials are now like old enough that we're in long unhappy marriages and getting divorced and stuff like that, right? But in talking to you about these domestic dramas, it seems like these stories are repeatable throughout generations. But I'm wondering, what do you think makes it unique for this generation?
The reason I wanted to write about it is I was thinking about some of those, material conditions that caused the infidelity novel boom after World War II. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about the middle class then versus the middle class now. And those books are very much about maybe coming back from the war, trying to make a life, and finding middle class empty and difficult to deal with for nebulous reasons. And I thought, well, things have only gotten more difficult since then. It's not that easy to have a comfortable life anymore. And it's not that easy to, have this sort of stereotypical 2 cars, house in the suburbs, take your kids on vacation. Like, this is not an attainable thing anymore. And none of these signifiers even mean the same thing. Marriage doesn't mean the same thing. So I wanted to sort of dig into what that looks like now and how things have gotten even worse. And in some ways, how they've gotten better. Men do some of the domestic work. Has only improved. Sure.
Yeah. That's author Erin Summers. Her new book, The 10-Year Affair, comes out Tuesday. Erin, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This message comes from Schwab. Everyone has moments when they could have done better, like cutting their own hair or forgetting sunscreen, so now you look like a tomato. Same goes for where you invest. Level up and invest smarter with Schwab. Get market insights, education, and human help when you need it. Learn more at schwab.com.
This message comes from Progressive Insurance. Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Robin Ryle's short story collection, Sex of the Midwest, is all about opening up secrets. But Ryle tells NPR's Scott Simon that it shouldn't be a secret that people in small towns lead weird, complex, interesting sex lives. Here's Scott.
One morning with fog on the river, all inboxes in Lanier, Indiana, population 12,234, receive an email.
Invitation to participate. Sexual practices in a small Midwestern town. As subject's line went, it left a lot to be desired. It wasn't surprising that the email ended up in the spam folders of half the people in Lanier, and there it remained, undiscovered. Another fifth went to email addresses that no one checked or had long since forgotten the passwords for, and so these people too were saved the shock or titillation or outrage.
But maybe not for long. Robin Ryle's new book, Sex of the Midwest, knits more than a dozen small-town short stories into the lives of more than 65 characters, some of whom find this survey pushing and pulling on parts of their lives they thought had been pinned into place. Robin Ryle is a professor of sociology and gender studies at Hanover College in Indiana, and she joins us from the studios of WFPL, Louisville Public Media. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
What's the range of reactions that roll through this town?
Well, Don Blankman, who is the character in the very first story, is outraged. Coach Don Blankman, a former basketball coach, retired now, recovering from COVID, waiting for a lung transplant. He's shocked and a little outraged, also a little confused because, he's not real great with technology. But at the same time, he finds out from his wife that there's a outbreak of STDs at the junior high school. And so he decides that he has to do something about it. His solution to that is to run for the school board. Loretta, who works for the health department, is kind of indifferent to the survey. She's not really titillated by sex, but she is sort of obsessed with making sure that the hot dog vendor, the hot dog cart guy, is prevented from running his hot dog cart, which is what the city government has tasked her with. So she has a hot dog guy obsession.
What are some of the ways in which the pandemic changed Lanier that we should know?
I think for Don Blankman, the character, one of the things that I was thinking about when I wrote Don is trying to get myself inside the head of a certain type of person who thinks very differently from me. And I think Don and a lot of people like him, one of the things the pandemic really brought home was thinking about death and a fear of death. And so one of the things that Don's confronting, he hasn't thought about his own death. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of people in society today. There's a scene where he literally thinks that death has come for him in the form of these two women tourists and literally gets up and runs away. So I think one of the things is thinking about death, thinking about meaning. So Rachel, the bartender, throughout the arc of the story, becomes interested in writing, goes to a writer's conference. I think she's thinking about what is the meaning in the face of the pandemic. There's a story about a kid who is in San Francisco and decides to move to Lanier. And I think there's a lot of transition thinking about where do we want to be now? So a lot of geographic displacement that happened in the wake of the pandemic. So yeah, I think those are some of the threads.
Are you from a town that reminds you of Lanier, or is it vice versa?
I live in a town that is very much like Lanier, and very much inspired these stories. So I think of the book, one way I've described the book is a love letter to small towns. I think we have a certain narrative about small towns and in rural parts of the country, especially in places like Indiana. But I think those narratives often miss the complexity and really just the weirdness of life in small towns. I think people think small towns are homogenous. Everyone's the same. Everyone's kind of boring and straight and conservative. And that's not my experience in the small town where I live.
I confess, and I'm not proud of this, I was surprised to find a drag brunch in Lanier, Indiana.
Yeah, and when I workshopped these stories with people from around the country, and I had people say to me, I don't believe that a small town of 12,234 people would have this many drag events. But I have to say, in the small town where I live, there are quite a few drag brunches, drag bingo, and I think that's part of the misconception.
I love the character of Rachel the bartender. First off, she hates Bloody Marys, doesn't she?
She does.
She likes the fact that people can open up to her. She hears a lot of good stories. Mm-hmm. But if they become tiresome, she can just move on, right?
Yes. I've never worked as a bartender. I worked as a waitress in college quite a bit. I spend a bit of time in our local bar in Madison. And it is the beauty. In the end, you can always say, I've got to get those drinks, or I've got to get that table, and move away if people become too annoying.
What, and I'll put it this way, what drives Rachel to commit literature?
That's a good question. I think she goes to the writers' conference purely because she wants to stay in the Virginia Woolf room. But then I think she becomes a writer to make sense of her experiences after the pandemic. She has a little bit of a breakdown at the writers' conference, thinking about, what am I doing here? And I think in a lot of the stories you see one of the kids who comes back, he talks about everyone promised us after the pandemic everything would be better. And he's betrayed by, that's not actually true. It's after the pandemic, or at least the worst of the pandemic, and things aren't really better. So I think part of Rachel and everyone in the story is dealing with this sense that we had this promise if we could just get through, things would be okay. And things didn't turn out the way that maybe we thought they would, or people told us they would.
What do you like about small-town life? What made you want to, in a sense, speak up for it?
It's a very difficult time historically right now in the United States. There's a lot of anger, and I think the tendency to dehumanize each other is very easy and very tempting. And I think in a small town, because you're living intimately with people who are very different from you, it makes it a little bit harder to dehumanize your neighbors, to think of them as not like you in some ways, even if, like Don Blankman, they think very differently from you. So I think there's a kind of important way in which we have to live next to each other, and we have to figure out ways to get along.
Robin Ryle's new book of stories, Sex of the Midwest. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week on NPR's Book of the Day. If you want more, you can sign up for our newsletter at npr.org/newsletter/books. I'm Andrew Limbong. This podcast is produced by Chloe Weiner and edited by Megan Sullivan with help from Ivy Buck. Our founding editor is Petra Mayer. The show elements for this week were produced and edited by Sarah Robbins, Jordan Marie Smith, Samantha Balaban, Melissa Gray, Kier Wakim, Patrick Jan Watananan, Julie Deppenbrock, Taylor Haney, Justine Kennan, Jason Fuller, and Ryan Bank. Yolanda Sanguini is our executive producer. Thanks for listening.
This message comes from Vital Farms, who works with small American farms to bring you pasture-raised eggs. Farmer Tanner Pace shares a moment that brings him a sense of purpose.
I think that when the barn doors open and the hens run to the paddocks, you can truly see what a happy hen really is. I love pasture-raised eggs because you can see the work and the pride that the farmers have and have put into these eggs.
To learn more about how Vital Farms farmers care for their hens, visit vitalfarms.com.
This message comes from Solidigm. Yesterday's approach to storage can't meet the demands of today's AI ambitions. Bigger, faster, and more energy efficient, Solidigm solid-state storage solutions are optimized for AI. Learn more at storageforai.com.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.